Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be reading Colson Whitehead's novel, The Underground Railroad. Underground Railroad was published in 2016, and it won both the Pulitzer and the National Book Club Award. Now, Underground Railroad is going to present us with something a little bit different than what we saw in 1984 or A Handmaid's Tale. While this is speculative fiction, to be sure, some of you may think at first, how is this a dystopian novel? And here's the problem. As the title already suggests, Underground Railroad is like a real thing, right? Back in the pre-Civil War era, there was a connection of houses and communities that would help to move slaves from the South to the free states in the North. And of course, they went over land under the cover of night, by boat, hiding from place to place, sleeping sometimes in cellars to avoid raiders. And as part of this, you will find, as you open the novel, we are in very much that real history. We start out on the Randall Plantation in Georgia, and it feels very much like any other historical fiction talking about the horrors of slavery. And so how does this become a dystopia? How does it even become speculative fiction, for that matter? Well, as you read, you'll discover that in this novel, The Underground Railroad is not just a series of homes that are connected by guides helping slaves get to the North. It's actually a real underground railroad with like steam trains and handcarts and underground stations. And so as Cora and Caesar and Lovey try to escape the Randall Plantation in Georgia, they will be taking a real underground train. Well, that right there moves us into the realm, obviously, of speculative fiction, because the Underground Railroad was just what it was called. It wasn't a real railroad. But as we move from place to place, from Georgia to South Carolina, from South Carolina to North Carolina to Tennessee, and Tennessee finally to Indiana, we'll discover that we're not only moving geographically, we're also somewhat moving through time. And it's not exactly an alternative history, but we start to see different trends in American history as America has wrestled with the deep evil of racism. We'll see those trends starting to manifest themselves in different places. So when we get to South Carolina, you'll discover a scenario that seems a bit like different forms of kind of patriarchal assimilation. So if the plantation in Georgia is kind of hell, South Carolina is a place of slavery without the name. It's a place where the former slaves are no longer owned by particular masters, but their paperwork says they're owned by the US government. They don't have no wages, but their low wages mean that they don't have any self-determination. They are moved from job to job at the will of white overseers. And we eventually come to discover that they are there for the exhibition of white people's kind of education in a museum context. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling a little. I don't want to give too much away to you before you read it. And we'll also discover that there is quite a nefarious plot at the hospital to literally stamp out future generations of Black Americans. As they move to North Carolina, we'll have a different experience. The experience of being locked in the attic and watching a sort of ritualistic playing out of incredible violence, all set to a church-like ceremony. In this case, racism is more than just a person-to-person experience, but it becomes actually linked to state identity and formal power structures in a way that is absolutely bone-chilling. In Tennessee, we see environmental chaos as the destruction of the land, moving of first the indigenous people, and then wave and wave of other settlers off the land by whoever is next in power, has left a fiery wasteland. And then finally we arrive in Indiana, where things seem to almost be okay. Each of these seems okay at different points and becomes incredibly problematic. And so to include this in a conversation about dystopian ethics is to, in some ways, take a stand on the realities of slavery being something that really brings us into our worst nightmares. But Whitehead's novel actually invites us to make these comparisons with the sorts of dystopian literature that we've been studying through the ways that he plays with speculative fiction, with alternative histories, with the concretization of the Underground Railroad itself. In the end, this novel invites us to reflect on racism, but it also invites us to reflect on ownership more generally and the construction of American freedom, and asks us the question, is our idea of freedom ultimately predicated on theft? I look forward to thinking through some of the problems that you'll find in this novel in upcoming videos. Enjoy reading.